I'm Rob Nelson, and I'm here with Jack Vanlandingham, who was an FBI informant in prison with the mobster Carlos Marcelo when Carlos Marcelo told him exactly how he orchestrated the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a truth that has been kept hidden on FBI tapes for 25 years. It's time for that truth to come out. Jack, thank you very much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Great to do this interview. This is exciting.
I'm pleased to talk to you.
I'm going to ask you just a couple quick questions, then I'm going to go back and get the story. Jack, did Carlos Marcelo, the mobster, tell you that he set up the hit on John F. Kennedy?
Yes, he did.
Where did he tell you?
He told me in our cell, 5x8 cell that I shared with him for over a year.
And was this information just between the two of you, or was it recorded?
No, it was recorded. I had a radio that they supplied me.
Sorry, was it recorded, and by who?
It was recorded by the FBI. It was transmitted to the counselor's office and then boosted down to Dallas 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day tape. Everything that was said in the cell was transcribed on tape, and I know that it got through.
So you have Carlos Marcelo confessing to you and telling you how he set up the murder of John F. Kennedy,
right.
And it's on tape recorded by the FBI.
Absolutely.
Where are those tapes?
They're holding them in the archives.
Will they release them?
I have no idea. We've been trying to get them to release them for years, and they refuse to release them. They don't want the information out.
Has anybody but you, are you the only person that heard this story? It's on tape, but are you the only person that this was told to?
No. Out in the yard, we had another guy with me.
Sorry, but in the cell.
In the cell was
is
only
the information that's on these tapes? He only told it to you.
He only told it to me.
So you're essentially the only living person. He's dead. Who knows
I am
this?
the
other
only
than the
living
tapes?
person to hear him tell me about planning and carrying out the murder of JFK, our beautiful president, and how he did it, how he carried it out, and who did it, and where and why. I know all about it, and I'm the only one, except the FBI, that does know.
It's on tape. The
It's
FBI
on tape.
has it on tape.
It's on tape.
Have you tried to get those tapes?
We tried for years to get them, and they refused to release them.
Why won't they release
don't
them?
want anybody to know, because they want the Warren Commission to stand, and all the conspiracy bullshit to stand. They don't want the truth coming out. They don't want the American people to know the truth. I and my family and the movie that we're going to have come out shortly all want everybody to know what's on those tapes, and they want the FBI to release them. Because right now, at the present time, it's my word against theirs. You know, they can say, hey, there weren't any tapes. They can't do that because there's too many people who know that there were recordings.
I was going to say, they can't. They know the tapes are there.
Oh yeah, they know the tapes are there, but they refuse to release them.
Okay, let's get to this.
Now I happen to know that story was put on tape because my handler told me the next day after he told me the story of how he did it, that it was going on up to the Attorney General. I know that it was recorded.
So tell me about this. There's a book called Legacy of Secrecy.
There's a book called Legacy of Secrecy, and Lamar Waldron put one chapter of my story in the book. And he sold it to Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers contacted me, and they requested my life story, which I sold to them. This was 3.5 years ago, and now everything is getting going, and Leonardo DiCaprio is going to play my part, and Robert De Niro is going to play Carlos Marcelo in the movie. And they're getting it going right now.
And that movie and that story is the story of what happened to you
exactly
in prison with Carlos
Yes.
Marcelo.
So I can't.
So for people watching, Jack Vanlandingham was in a prison cell with the mobster, the now dead mob leader Carlos Marcelo, when at the FBI's pressure was had a wiretap to find out how Carlos Marcelo was running the mob. And in the process of that, Jack was told by Carlos Marcelo how Carlos Marcelo had set up the assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr. Jack Vanlandingham is the only person who heard that other than the FBI who was recording it, and to this day, 20 plus 5 years later, still won't release those tapes to the public.
That's exactly true, yes.
Jack, tell me, how did you end up in a prison cell with Carlos Marcelo?
Was in the day room. I stayed to myself. I couldn't tolerate these young punks. So I stayed in the day room all the time. And Carlos Marcelo would come in and sit in the front. And he got the Times-Picayune every day from New Orleans. And I would see him opening the paper, and I thought he was just reading the goddamn thing, you see. You know, he'd turn the pages and one thing and another. So one day I got up a nerve, and I walked up to the front of the room where he was, and I says, "Mr. Marcelo, do you mind if I read the paper after you're done with it?" And he got real mad and he slammed it down. He says, "Here, you can have the fucking thing." And he stormed out, and I thought I was in big trouble. I didn't know that I'd really committed a big sin, but evidently it is. Anyway, the next day, I was in exactly the same place. And he came in to the room, and he says, "Jack," he knew my name, he says, "come on down to the front here, I want to talk to you." So I went down to the front, and he says, "Do you like to read?" I says, "Yeah, I like to read." He says, "I have such horrible eyes, I cannot read the paper anymore. Would you mind reading me the paper?" I said, "Well, what particularly do you want me to read you?" And he says, I'll tell you what stories, just go through it and tell me what stories are in there. Mainly I want to know about Edwin Edwards. He's on trial right now in New Orleans. Anything that you can find in there that describes the trial or anything like that, let me know. He says, "Would you do that for me?" And he says, "You'll be a friend for life." I said, "Certainly." So I started going through the paper there, and I'd find articles about people that were arrested and this and that and the next thing. And he says, "Stop and read me that story. Read me that story." You have to understand, this guy had his hands in every fucking thing that went on in the South and Texas and everything else. People were being arrested, and he was afraid that he was going to get another indictment, especially from Edwin Edwards, because he told me that when he drove up in Louisiana, he had him in his pocket from the start. See, so he wanted to know all these things, and I did my best to oblige him. I didn't know he was illiterate. I thought he was just, he couldn't see well. That's what he told me. You can't get glasses in this fucking place.
Did Carlos Marcelo basically, was he the king of the prison?
Was he what?
Was he the king of the prison?
Oh, absolutely. Anything he wanted to do, he did. You have to understand, he was a billionaire, and these guards make $600-700 an hour. You think he couldn't get anything he wanted? He had the run of the prison. He assigned all the work details. He had his own table in the mess hall. He didn't eat the food that we ate. All of his clothes were supplied different. He received a teak-lined box of $100 cigars, each month, 30 of them, delivered to his cell. $100 Havanas, every single month, 30 of them. He could go anywhere he wanted to go, except there were times that he had to be locked down too, see?
And somehow you managed to not only become friends with him, but become what he described to you almost as like a son.
Yeah, after we had been together for 7, 8 months, see, he was not pleased with his son. His son was a playboy, and he didn't like his brother much either, and they weren't taking care of business on the outside. And he said, "Jack," he says, "if I'd only had you for a long time on the outside, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. Too many flakes." He says, "But I'm going to make you my adopted son, and when we get out of here, I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life. I'm going to fix you up with this lady that I know that's a millionaire. She was married to one of my people that got killed, and so you're my adopted son."
So you go from reading the paper with him to becoming very close to him.
Very close, yeah.
You become friends with him. He's confides in you.
Right.
What happens next?
what happens next is that as soon as I was put in the cell with them,
Well, back up to the story of how that happened. So what happens next is the FBI approaches you.
the FBI comes to see me. This guy I'm telling you about, the resident agent of Texarkana, and make a long story short, he says, if you help us, we're going to get you out of here. If you don't, we're going to drop a dime on you, and you're not going to be worth a dime. You won't live in this prison with what I'm going to tell people. In other words, he put me into a position of the rock and a hard spot. He said, hey, you either help us or we're going to screw you.
Okay, so tell me the story. The FBI tell me what happens. They take you and ask you to do what?
They asked me to get information on how he was running his organization from prison because they knew that his organization was still going on. You understand? They knew that nothing had changed on the street, so they wanted to know how he was doing it. Well, hell, that was easy to find out, but and I found out all that information for them.
But give me a little more detail. So they asked you to do that, and you told me the story before. What happens?
What happened is this: I was living in the dorm, and he had a little guy living in his cell with him. And one night, the marshals came and rolled him up, took him to who knows where, nobody knows where. Carlos couldn't find out, and they sent the counselor to see me, told me I'm moving in with Carlos. So I went down to see him, and I told him, hey, they tell me I'm having to move in the cell with you. I hope it's not going to be out of the way for you. Is it okay with you? And he says, well, I got to have somebody, and you read good, so it was okay with him that I moved in with him. And he says, you're going to have to take care of the cell, clean the cell and all that, so forth, because I don't do that. I said, that's fine, I can do all that. And he said, you got the top bunk? I said, that's fine, no problem.
So, but I'm trying to get you to tell me the story of what happens with the FBI taking you and asking you to go in and put a plant in the whole thing.
They set me down in the counselor's office, and he starts proceeding to tell me about all the dirty things that the little man had done on the street and all this so forth. And it all went right over my head because, what the hell? The guy was helping me, and I didn't give a goddamn what he had done on the street. He was making my life better, and he was treating me like a human being, whereas in the prison, you're a piece of shit, And he was running that prison, so I figured it would be the greatest place to be.
Sure.
What the hell? I had to do 8 years. Why not be with a guy that could help you instead of all the bullshit I had to put up without him? So anyway, they proceed to tell me either I do help him or they're going to drop a dime on me. That's what they called it. And I was terrified from that instant on. And so what happened was this. I'm in the dorm. They tell me to report to the counselor's office. And this was the next day that he left. And he said, you're going to move in with Carlos Marcelo. And so, as I told you, I went down to see him. And the next day, they had put money on my prison books. You see, the FBI had put money on my prison books. That's the way they handle it. You have money, and then if you want something, you go and buy it, and they take it off your books. They told me that I ought to go buy this radio. And I said, well, what do I want to do that for? And he said, well, don't worry about it. He says, there's a bug in this radio, and you've got to have it in your cell with you because we're going to transcribe anything and everything that's said in that cell from now on to the time you're in there.
So they're asking you to put basically a wiretap in the cell with Carlos Marcelo.
Yeah.
So that they can find out what he's doing to run the mob.
Right. They want to know everything he's doing. We want it all on tape so we can get him. And I said, oh man, okay.
Well, wait, how'd you feel about this?
I was scared. I was scared to death. See, here this guy is running the prison. He could have me killed in a heartbeat. All he had to do is just tell one of these inmates, hey, Jack is in bad books with me. I want him out of the way. I'd have been dead. I'd have been laying in the yard in the hallway. He could have had it done in a heartbeat.
So why not say no to the FBI?
Because it was either the point of me not doing it and doing it, and I figured, well, hey, maybe I can spend some time. Maybe I can get out of this.
Well, let me ask you something, though. You said before, I want you to tell me again, why not just say no to the FBI? What did the FBI do?
There's no way to say no to them.
What would they do if you did?
They told me that if I don't help them, they're going to drop a dime on me, and he would know I've been talking about him.
So if you helped him and set him up, you could be killed by him.
Right.
But if you didn't help him and set him up, the FBI was going to say you did help him.
That's
you
exactly right, and that I've been killed anyway.
that way.
So I figured I was in a hard place. I figured, well, maybe I better go along with them. See, maybe I can get out of this deal. But anyway, it was impossible to get out of it, and they were moving too fast. And they tell me to go buy this radio, which I did, and I brought it back to the cell. And I asked him, I said, "You don't mind if I bought this radio, do you?" He says, No. He says, "It's okay." I said, "Hell, we can listen to the news. You can find out about people when they're another." And I set it up on his case, his clothing locker and one thing and another, and I went to bed. The next morning, I went to breakfast. I asked him if he was going to breakfast with me. He said, No, I'm going to stick around. So I went to breakfast, and I come back, and the radio is gone. And my heart fell completely to the floor. I was so scared.
You're like, I'm a dead man.
I was dead. I climbed up on my bunk, and I stayed there for the rest of the fucking day. And he wanted to know what was wrong. I said, "I'm not feeling well at all." And I said, "Well, what happened to the radio? The guards take it already?" "Oh, no," he says, "I gave it to a friend of mine. He wants to buy a radio of his own, and he wants to see if this was the kind he wants." I said, "Well, it's the only kind he got in the store." So anyway, the next day the guy brought it back in the morning, and we're both in the cell. And he says, "This is not the kind of radio I want, Carlos." He says, "I want one that gets shortwave and all that bullshit." And he says, "Okay, well, anyway," so he put it back up on the locker. And when they both walked out, he went out to talk to him, see? And I figured, this is it. I've had it. I looked at the radio, and the screws in the back, they were gnarled. I knew that he had been in the back. You understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I was so scared. I figured, well, okay, this is my last day on Earth. My last day on Earth. So all I could do is just go through the motions. And he comes back as if nothing's wrong, and he goes about his business and everything. And I didn't know that he was putting on, and he was just waiting to set me up for the coup de grace, I had no idea from that day till the day I left. But actually, the guy did not find the bug in it. This was a very unique situation the FBI pulled. They had this bug in the radio, and I put it on his case, and it was pointing at the counselor's office, and what the FBI did was put a high-powered transmitter in the light fixture. It transmitted to the light fixture from there to Dallas FBI headquarters 24 hours a day.
Wow. And you're the only, this is the longest inside prison informant wiretapping scenario, right? The FBI has ever done, right?
It's the only one that they've ever done and got a U.S. attorney to issue a wiretap. And how they got it, I have no idea, but they did. And everybody knows that they got it. That's all common knowledge. They won't deny that part of it at all.
Things Carlos Marcelo told you in prison, other than how he arranged for the assassination of Kennedy, was that he was behind the killing of Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamster.
That's correct. One day I was advised to go to the public library, our public library. And I went down there was nobody there but a flaky inmate sitting at a desk. And I sat down at a table, and I looked between the bookcases, and a beautiful dressed guy standing there with a paper in his hand. And he looks around at me, and he asked me to come over, so I went in between the bookcases with him, and he says, I was sent to see you, Jack. He says, you don't need to know anything about me except that I want to know if the little man knows anything about Hoffa. And he opens the paper. He had a Dallas Morning News, and there was an article in there. They were always printing stories about where Hoffa was buried and one thing or another. He says, check on these stories in the paper about where Hoffa was and see if you can find out any information about him. And he says, that's the only time that you'll see me. Any information, give it to the FBI. I said, fine. So I walk out of there, and he walks out. How they went about that, getting him in there, I don't know, but they did. So I went back, and I had the Morning News, and I had the Picayune paper both. He got both of them every morning. And I'm reading this paper to him. And I come across this Jimmy Hoffa story. And I says, Jesus Christ, they've found Jimmy Hoffa. He's buried in some kind of a tomb at a ballpark in New York or something. And he starts laughing his head off. He says, read me the story. So I read him the story, and he's laughing like a son of a bitch. And then he became very serious, and he was standing up, and I was sitting on a metal chair. He says, I'm going to tell you what happened to Hoffa, Jack. He says, I had a call from friends in the East that Hoffa was shooting his mouth off all over the country and wanted his job back as Teamster boss. And of course, we didn't want him as Teamster boss anymore. We were fine with that. So a guy by the name of Provenzano brought him to my farm. And I did as my friends told me. I talked to him, and then Provenzano and two of my guys took him to my wrecking yard in New Orleans, and that's the last that anybody will ever see of him. And he laughed again, got up, or no, he was standing up and walked out of the cell and went down somewhere. I don't know where he went. But that all went on the tape. So naturally I called my contact. I said, you heard that story? He says, Jack, we heard the story, and you know that's all secondhand stuff. We're not interested in that. We want to know how he's running his organization. They didn't want to know anything about him.
The interesting thing about your experience in this was that the FBI, even after you had him talking about and explaining how he'd set up the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the FBI could have cared less. They told you basically.
They didn't want to know.
Cared less. They didn't want to know. It wasn't that they could care less. They didn't want that information. They wanted to be quiet.
Information out to the public.
And did they actually tell you to stop asking questions?
Yeah, they said, we're not interested in that, Jack. He said,
not interested in the guy who the Senate Intelligence Committee at one point said could have killed Kennedy. They didn't actually want it.
That information's already been put out to the public on the Warren Commission and all that, and they know what happened and everything. So we're not interested in that. We're interested in how he's running his organization.
They wanted the FBI, the government, wanted to keep the story. The Warren Commission
they wanted
version,
it suppressed.
That it was one person, Lee Harvey Oswald. They didn't want the truth.
That's right.
They still don't want the truth.
They still don't want the truth. They still want everybody to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the man.
And lots of people have come up with lots of theories that the mob did this and that. But you actually have the person who
planned and carried it out.
You have the person who the Senate Intelligence Committee at one point did say had motive and had the ability to do it. You actually had that person telling you how he did it.
Exactly how he did it, how he sent for the guys from across the ocean, and
you have him telling you, Carlos Marcelo telling you exactly how he organized the hit on Kennedy.
He told me exactly how he organized it and how he carried it out.
Okay, let's go there. Let's talk about that. When did the first piece of Carlos Marcelo hinting at what he'd done come up?
That was out in the yard. That was the first time that I ever heard anything mentioned about his being responsible for the death of the president.
Take me through the story.
Well, the story is this. We were sitting at a gazebo. They had a gazebo built in the yard when we were allowed to go out in the yard, you understand? And it was a big affair, about as big around as this room is, see? And everybody had a table there. He had his own table, nobody could sit at but his table. And me and another friend were sitting at the table with him on this day. And this guy was arrested for bookmaking. He worked for his brother in New Orleans, so Carlos knew him pretty good, see? So we're sitting there, and you have to understand that Carlos was always telling a story about how he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped by Robert Kennedy and thrown into Guatemala and had to go through the jungle and all this sort of thing to get to help and all this sort of thing. And in detail, he'd tell you the story. So this guy that was sitting with us, he says, Carlos, tell us a story again about you being kidnapped and thrown into Guatemala. He says, why, those dirty motherfuckers, I went down to the parole office and to the customs office, and I was checking in, and Marshall strewing me and my lawyer on a goddamn fucking airplane and threw me to Guatemala and dumped me on a strip. And it took me 2 days crawling through the goddamn jungle to get to a civilization where I could get medical help and all this sort of thing.
So he's
and
saying
then he
that Robert.
stopped, see? He says, I'm going to tell you something. He's in the middle of telling this story, and he stopped right in the sentence. He says, I'm going to tell you guys something. I had the little son of a bitch killed, and I would do it again. He was a thorn in my shoe. And he stopped cold, never said another word. And we're both sitting there looking at him, and so we start talking about other things. Well, I knew who he was talking about. And, of course, the other guy knew, too.
You didn't think he was talking about Robert Kennedy?
No. And I'll tell you how I found out about that. Immediately, they called, clear the yard and go to your cells for count. I got back to the cell with Carlos, and he was real quiet, and we're waiting for count. And he's sitting right by the radio, and I'm hoping he's going to say something else about it so it'll go on tape. He says, Jack, he says, what transpired on the yard, what I said on the yard, he said, you can never mention that to anybody as long as you live. And I looked at him, I said, Carlos, anything you tell me stays with me. And I said, these people were bugging you, they were ruining your businesses in New Orleans and all over the country. I would have done the same goddamn thing as you did. But there's something I want to know. Why didn't you just take Robert Kennedy out instead of killing the president? And he says, because, Jack, if I'd have done that, they'd have put the dogs on us worse than what they are right now. They'd have got another U.S. attorney down there, and they would have really raked us over the coals. By having the president taken out, it was going to end his administration, and we could get back to doing business as usual. Now, this went over the tapes, of course, and now they found out that what he was talking about was that he had Kennedy killed, not Robert Kennedy. So I called my contact, and I says, hey, he says, you got to indict this son of a bitch. He admitted to me and another guy that he had the president killed. Now, my attitude completely changed about this guy at that point. I had to go through living with him and associating with the FBI and everything and putting my life on the line. But now I was in a position to find out the information that I wanted to know, because JFK was a great president. I think he was one of the finest people in all the world. And this bastard took it on himself to kill our president. I had to find out more.
So let me stop you right there for a second. So you went from feeling like, I don't care why, I don't care if this guy's running the mob, he's helping me out.
Exactly.
So when you found out that he killed Kennedy, you suddenly, it became personal. You wanted the information.
I wanted the information, even though the FBI did not. I had to find out how he did it and everything else. And you know how he did it. I explained it to you.
No. But this is all new for tape, so tell me that again. You had to find out how he did it?
Yeah,
So tell me that again.
I had to find out how he did it. So I was.
Tell me the whole sentence again. Sorry, Jack. Tell me the whole thing again for the camera. That you once your attitude changed from not caring to actually you cared. You now disliked him and wanted to find out the truth.
Now I despised him, even though I was still so scared. I didn't know whether I was going to live and die from one minute to the next, and that's a fact. It had no bearing on that part of it. But I knew I had to find out more information. And you see, while all this is going on, they're trying to set up a bribery deal with him, and I was supposed to do a bribery deal with him, and we're going to be sent to another prison and all these sort of things. See, a bunch of horse shit that didn't amount to a goddamn thing. They could have indicted him for Hoffa. They could have indicted him for the yard incident because there was another witness. And my contact guy says, well, no, it'd be just your word against Marcelo, Jack, and it wouldn't stand up in court. I said, bullshit, there was another guy there.
But that's fine, but there wasn't recorded. You actually had him say it, and it was recorded.
Absolutely.
So tell me.
This is what I had to get out of him. I knew I was being sent out because the counselor came and told me and him in our cell that I was being moved first and that he was coming after, okay? And he really believed all this. He believed all this. But anyway, I knew I only had a little time, and I knew I had to find out.
Jack, Carlos Marcelo has now told you, and it's on tape, the FBI's transmitted it, that he was responsible for Kennedy's death, but you don't know the details yet. And you're determined to find out. And what happened? You were up against a time clock, right? You found out suddenly you were going to be moved. Tell me the story.
And I knew I had to get the information out of him and get it on tape if I could. So he was sitting on his bed, and this is a 5x8 cell, and I was sitting on a metal chair facing him. And he was smoking one of his big black cigars, and the cell was covered with blue smoke. I mean, you could cut it with a knife. And I came out right out and I said, Carlos, I said, you told me that Oswald was just a figurehead, that he was just a plant there and a fall guy for the whole thing. Tell me exactly how you did this. He says, you really want to know, Jack? And I said, yeah, I really want to know, just for my own sake. He says, okay, I'll tell you.
Now let me stop you for 1 second. How are you feeling at that moment? He's about to tell you. How are you feeling?
I was so tense and scared. And when I asked him, I didn't think he was going to tell me. I thought he'd get on to me or something, say, why you want to know all this stuff, see? But he didn't. He looked at me over his big cigar, looked me right in the eye, and he had cold slate gray eyes, this guy. I mean, he scared the dog shit out of you. So he said, I'll tell you what I did, Jack. He says, I have a friend in Texas by the name of Campeche. I said, who is he? I said, he runs a big club down in Dallas, friend of mine for years. I sent him to Michigan, Selfridge. He called it Selfridge, and I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. It was Selfridge, Michigan, but he says Selfridge. And I had 2 guys from Sicily brought over, 2 Italians. They came in on an airline to Canada, and they were brought across the river, and Campeche picked them up and brought them all the way across the country to my farm. When I got them out the farm, I supplied them with weapons so they could do their target practice. He had a huge farm in New Orleans, covered by, on both sides with water. Nobody could get in. There was one road in and one road out, period. And so he had all the access that he wanted. They couldn't bug him, they couldn't do shit. So he had these guys there, and then he called Ruby. And he called Ruby at the Carousel Club in Dallas, and he called Ruby, and he told Ruby to get his ass to the farm the next day. And he had already had Oswald there for a week brainwashing him, telling him what he was going to do. You see, this was the first part of November. And as you know, the 23rd was a big day.
Let me stop and get this story again. I want a few more details. Back me up again.
Okay.
So he told you, start me with the Campecho going and the hitman one more time.
He contacted Joseph Campeche, who owned this club, and he had been a friend for years, and he sent him to Selfridge, Michigan. And if you look on the map, there's a big lake that separates the United States and Canada right at that point. And he had him brought across the lake, and Campeche picked him up in his vehicle.
Had who brought him, sorry? He had who?
He had Joseph Campeche picked these two Italians up that he brought over from Sicily and brought to his farm in New Orleans. And at that point, he told me that he supplied arms so they could do their target practice, set up targets and all this sort of thing.
So they were going to be the hitmen?
Absolutely. That's the guys that was going to do the job for him.
Okay.
If you think he was going to trust that flaky Oswald, let me tell you something about him. He didn't do anything halfway. When he planned something, he planned it all the way. Now, this is what the FBI does not want the American public to know, that two Italians are the ones that murdered our president.
So keep going with the story. So the hitmen come to the farm to train.
Right.
And where does Oswald fit into this?
Oswald had been there the week previously, and
How did he get to Oswald?
he had Oswald brought to his farm, and he kept him there for a week,
Through a
brainwashing
CIA
him.
contact, or?
Who knows? He had CIA contacts that could do these things for him. He had two of them. He had to know the routes and everything that the president was going to take. That's how he found out. He had two CIA agents on his payroll. So anyway, he had Oswald there to start with, and then as you know, he set him up at this book depository and so forth and so on. But he was only going to be a figurehead. He thought he was going to be the man that did the shooting and everything, but he found out different. So
You're saying Oswald?
yes,
thought he was
Oswald.
going to be the guy doing
Oswald thought he was going to be the big hero to shoot our president.
So Marcelo tells you that he's brought Oswald in and told him he's going to do the
right,
job.
he's going to do the job.
But in reality, he's got these two hitmen who he's
yes,
training.
he's got the two hitmen there.
Setting Oswald up to be the
Right.
patsy.
Now, he has Ruby come from his carousel club, and he gets him into the farm, and he tells Ruby, listen, these two guys that you saw outside are going to make the hit on the president, and I'm going to have them taken into Dallas, and they'll be placed in the position where they can do the job, one in the front, one in the back. I said, well, I said, Jesus Christ, and I was dumbfounded. So Ruby says, what about Oswald? He says, he's just a figurehead. He says, this is what I want you to do. When he comes running out of there, and he will after he hears the shooting going down, he'll come running out of that place, and you hit him. You got to take him out. That's your job, and if you don't, we'll get you.
So now Oswald's being set up as the patsy to then be killed, so the person who killed the president supposedly will be dead, and the whole thing can be covered up and cleaned up.
Exactly.
And Ruby's supposed to take him out.
Yeah, Ruby was supposed to take him out, but he missed him.
And where are the hitmen?
The hitmen, one is up in the depository the other side of Oswald, and one is on the knoll.
Thus the shots from the front.
And the back. And they are the ones that did the shooting before Oswald even looked down the scope of his rifle. Now, some say that he got a shot off.
The stray bullet, the one that
There was a
goes
stray
into the
bullet,
tree.
a 6.555, which was the caliber of the rifle he was using, against the curb. And of course, the FBI wanted to use him as the fall guy and the murderer of the president. Of course, they didn't know at that time about these two hitmen because I hadn't been in jail with them yet, and they hadn't heard the tapes, right?
Right, but I believe they knew something. But
Yeah, they knew
they
things.
knew something didn't add up. But
They knew that Oswald wasn't the shooter, but they didn't know the details as I did and found out in the cell with him.
So what happens? Oswald flees. What happens? The shots
Okay,
go off.
Oswald flees, and you know what happened to him. Everybody knows that he went to some theater somewhere.
But why does Marcelo tell you? Why didn't Jack Ruby kill him coming out?
Jack Ruby missed him. He missed him coming out. So the little man got a hold of Ruby. He said, "You got to get him, and you can go through that jail because those cops know you. You've got to get him and take him out. I don't want him opening his mouth." Well, everybody knows that Ruby got him into prison and killed him, and then they put him in jail. The last guy to ever see Jack Ruby in jail was Campeche, and Campeche came to the jail the next day that they had Ruby in there and gave him the word, "You keep your fucking mouth shut or you're dead." And he did.
And Campeche's the associate who
Yes.
of Marcelo who picked
As
up
soon
the
as
hitman.
the shooting went down, the two Italians were picked up by Campeche and taken to Campeche's big nightclub restaurant and put into the kitchen cooking spaghetti. And how he got him back out of the country, I never did find out, but I did find out how he got him in. When I told Kirk about this...
Told who?
My contact, Tom Kirk.
Your FBI contact.
Yeah, my FBI contact. He says, "Well, you know, this has all got to go up." They heard the tapes, and, you know, they weren't jockeying around. We heard everything he said, Jack, and he says, "Good work, but... you know, there's nothing we can do about it. It's got to go to the FBI and all that. We got to concentrate on what you're doing now on this move you're making to the prisons and his bribery deal and everything." And I said, "What the fuck are you talking about, Kirk? This man admitted he had our president murdered and told you exactly how he did it, and you're not going to indict him? What are we even fooling around with any other thing for? I said, I've told you about 2 or 3 murders here, and you got it all on tape. It's on tape and transcribed in Dallas, and you're doing fuck all. What are you doing here with me and putting me in danger to find out stuff, and then you don't follow through with it?" He said, "Oh, well, you're doing a good job, Jack." He said, we're going to get to that, but we got to get to this bribery stuff.
Why could Jack Ruby pull it off with the police? You told me about that before.
Because
Marcelo said Jack Ruby...
you see, Jack Ruby was a float man for all the little gambling that went on in Dallas, Texas, and he collected the money to send to the little man, and he skimmed, and the little man told him if he caught him again, he was going to kill him.
The little man is Marcelo.
Yes, the little man, Carlos Marcelo, and so he had him in his pocket. He kept everybody in his pocket, and he planned things to a T. He had his CIA guys on his payroll. Big bucks went out on this hit, man. Believe me, big bucks. But anyway.
And how did Ruby had with the police?
Pardon me?
How did Ruby have access to the police?
They came to his nightclub daily to drink free shots and fuck his women that he had in his carousel club. He supplied women and booze and bribes to the low echelon cops in Dallas, Texas. Campeche handled all the big gambling deals in Dallas and Fort Worth area. But he let this out to me. I said, "Well, are you going to find out about these guys?" He said, "We'd already did find out." He says, "The CIA and one of our people checked the airlines at that time of the year, and there were 2 Italians that came in on false passports, and they didn't leave out of the country again."
So they have a record of the two.
They had a record of
coming
these
in
2
from Canada.
Italians coming, and he didn't want to tell me that, but he did. And he says, "I shouldn't have told you that." He says, "But anyway, you ain't gonna tell nobody." Anyway.
This is your FBI guy.
Yeah, he told me that in the visiting room the next couple of days.
So just to get it clear, so the FBI, your FBI contact in the prison told you that they checked and they did see the evidence of 2
Yes.
2 Italians
2
coming
Italians coming from Sicily into Canada and on false passports, because that's what they were. but
They correlated with the right time.
Yeah, they didn't. They had correlated at the right time. They came in October. You see, October, the last part of October, and were brought to his farm. So he had everything planned. The man was a genius at planning things. I mean, you think he was going to let Ruby and all these guys, Oswald, be the main man up there? He wanted the president dead for his reasons to get Robert Kennedy off of his back. He didn't particularly want the president murdered. He didn't really have anything against him, except he was giving orders to his brother to come down on him and crack their businesses and interfere with everything they were doing illegally in Louisiana and Texas and everywhere else.
And on top of it, you already said this, but I'm going to ask again. And on top of it, Marcelo particularly had a thing. Not only was Kennedy coming after his business, after his operations, but he personally had a vendetta because he'd been deported, right?
Yes, he'd been deported, and
what
they did to him.
Right, and tell me that. Tell me again.
He had to report every month to customs, and because he was an alien, and he had a passport from Guatemala. So what happened is him and his lawyer reported to the customs, and they put handcuffs on him, threw him in this boxcar aircraft, a C-45, and took off and dropped him on a deserted landing strip in Guatemala, right in the jungle, right on the edge of the jungle, and threw them both out of the airplane, took the cuffs off them, and said, "Now you're home. Now we don't ever want to see you again." That's what the marshals told them. So they had to claw their way through the jungle for 2 days, and it screwed Marcelo's feet up real bad, and that's why the prison was letting him wear $500 Gucci's while he was in prison, because he had real bad feet, see? But he was really in bad shape when he got to this village where they could get some medical attention, and he told me this. He was kidnapped, or what he calls kidnapped. He was thrown out of the country in '61, and he told me about this story in '85. So you figure how many years that was, and he telling me in detail. And there's people that think Marcelo was senile. Let me tell you something. He was sharper than I was. I have a hell of a memory. The fucker had a better memory than I do.
A lot of people, some people in trying to discredit your story, Jack, have said that Carlos Marcelo, by the time in the 80s when you were in prison with him, was senile and couldn't remember anything. What's your response to that?
A lot of people said that. He was thrown out of the country in '61, and he told me in detail about the kidnapping and all in '85. How many years was that? And he told me in detail exactly what happened to him and his lawyer crawling through the jungle. Finally ended up in this village and getting medical attention, and how he got out of the country. He called.
He told you a lot of things in detail, though. So again, in general, your reaction to people saying he was senile would be what?
Yeah, you had to see him in action in the prison also. You know, there was card games going on in prison also, all the time, dice games, this and that and the next thing. The guy was a genius at cards. He could read cards. He'd play blackjack with 4 or 5 guys and beat the pants off of them every time. He'd win every time, because he knew how to count cards. He's the greatest gambler there ever was in New Orleans. That was his game. He loved gambling. People can say what they want to. He was as sharp as a tack. You know, he was in his 70s. I was 56. And believe me when I tell you, I have a memory. I remember what happened to me when I was 3 years old on. Everything. This guy had the greatest memory of anybody I ever seen in my life. And when he sit there in the cell telling me the story about how he planned and carried out the assassination, or the murder, I call it, of our beautiful president, it was in pure detail. Pure detail. He never missed a syllable. The guy was uncanny. Whoever says that he was sent out or something. They're just a bunch of bullshit because they weren't with him. I was.
And of course, the tapes would prove that.
Exactly, the
tapes
tapes would prove everything. I want the tapes out so people don't only hear my story about how he planned and carried everything out. I want them to hear the story that he told me in that 5x8 cell. I want them to hear in his own words what he told me, the whole story of how he carried it out. I want the American people and the world to know it. I don't want just me to know it.
And obviously, to people who would try to discredit you and say you're making this up, you would say what?
I would tell them this. The guy that ran the organization or the investigation that I was involved in, name was Kimmel. He was the investigating FBI agent. In a documentary that I did with NBC asked him point blank, did Marcelo ever tell Jack these stories? And he said, yes, he did tell him the stories, but I can't prove it, and I'll let it go at that. The reason he said that is because he was a retired FBI agent. He couldn't go into the tapes. He wasn't going to tell them about the tapes. And you have to understand, I kept my mouth shut for 25 years. My family didn't even know I went through all this. Nobody, because I was afraid for their life.
Well, let's go to that part. Let's pick up with the story of what happens after Marcelo has told you all this. What happens next?
What happens
and
next?
sort of give me the basic version, the shorter version of, they decide to move you. I want the story that leads up to how he finds out what's going on.
Okay, you see, the FBI had me rig this deal with them for a bribery. We're both going to be moved to Fort Worth, FCI, in Dallas, Texas.
You mean you were going to set him up to commit a...
Yes, I had already set it up, a bribery deal. He was going to pay the FBI. He was going to pay Tom Kirk, my contact, big bucks to be moved along with me to Fort Worth, FCI, in Dallas, Texas. So he was told by the counselor in our cell, you're going right after Jack. So the FBI wanted me out of everything at this point. They knew I was leaving in a few days. So Tom Kirk says, you've got to have Carlos put me on his visiting list. And I said, what do you want that for? He says, I just need it, Jack. Yeah, I said, well, hell, we're both going to be in Fort Worth. He said, do what I asked you. So I asked him to put him on. They came and picked me up. They didn't take me to Fort Worth. They took me to a fucking high-level penitentiary in outside of Oklahoma City called El Reno. I was so scared, I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. This place was scary. So what I did is I didn't have any money on the books, and I needed cigarettes, and I called his secretary. I had her phone number, and she took the call from me. Consequently, she sent me money, and she also told Carlos on the next call he made to her that I didn't go to Fort Worth, that I was in some crappy prison in Oklahoma. And this alerted him. He knew that there was something going down that wasn't right. He didn't put Kirk on his visiting list. So the FBI was in between a stone and a hard place. They were really trying to figure out what the hell to do. So what do? They come and get me out of El Reno and take me to another prison in Dallas. And I get there, and a week later, they chauffeur Marcelo in a chauffeur-driven machine to the prison and put him back in the same cell with me. And they had my guy came down there, Kirk came down there, and he said, Jack, you got to get him over to the visiting room. His son's going to be here, and you got to get me on your visiting list so I can be there with his son to finish this deal up. I said, okay, whatever. So we both get called to the visiting room, me for Kirk and him his son. And as soon as I get to the visiting room, Kirk tells me to blow the coop. I said, I can't do that, you're my visitor. He says, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. He says, get out of here. They wanted me out of it, you see what I'm saying? They didn't want me in the picture anymore. They only wanted to use me again. So I go. I went back to my dormitory. We had real nice rooms in this place. It was a nice place. And so an hour or so, here comes Carlos. And man, he was dragging and he was really uptight. What happened in the visiting room, I do not know to this day. You know, they're still trying to get the bribe on with his son, big bucks. So Carlos comes in, I says, how'd it go? He says, I don't want to talk about nothing, Jack. He said, he lays down in his bed and he turns his back to me. He always did this in the cell when he wanted to rest. And he went to sleep. And the next day, the very next day, he gets up and he walks out of the room and he goes somewhere, and I didn't know where he went. Everybody was still aware he was the big shot in the prison and all this sort of thing. Everybody was after him. So he comes back in the afternoon and he says, Jack, I'm moving out of your cell here. I want to go live with another guy. And my heart dropped. I said, the fucker knows what's gone down. I said, well, whatever, you know, I mean, it's been nice living with you and everything, and but if that's what you want to do. And I knew from that instant on that he knew something was going wrong, see? So what happened is my counselor come and grabbed me right after he went and told me he wanted to move, loaded me in his car and takes me to Fort Worth, FCI, the big, beautiful prison. And what they do is check me in. I'm thinking, hey man, I'm staying here. This is great. I'm away from that bastard and I'll never see him again. They put me in a lockup. They didn't put me in propylation. They put me in a lockup. The dirty bastards. And I'm in this great big beautiful cell phone, TV, everything, see, at FCI Fort Worth. And a guard comes around. He said, Jack, you got to get ready. You're going to Atlanta FCI. You're being picked up by the marshals. You're going to Atlanta FCI. The worst fucking prison in the whole fucking goddamn country. Mean machine. Anybody coming out of there is lucky. You get killed there just for spitting on the sidewalk.
So I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you. I think we're getting a little. I'm losing train of thought. How did Carlos Marcelo? How do you think Carlos found out?
Because his son refused to pay the bribe, as far as I know. See? I'm
confused. What was the bribe?
The bribe was big bucks for having him moved from FCI, Texarkana, to Fort Worth, and from Fort Worth out.
So Marcelo was trying to bribe his way out.
Yes.
And the FBI wanted.
I put the bribe in with him. I told him, look, my guy
set him
can.
up.
Yeah, I set him up. I said, my guy can get you to Fort Worth, and from there out of prison.
And then he'll get busted on the bribe and stay in prison longer. That was the
who will?
Was the FBI trying to set the bribe up?
Yes.
So that they could bust him.
Yes.
So they'd catch him trying to bribe his way out.
Yes, and then he would have stayed forever.
And you think that somehow in the process of that he found out that
somebody must have put the word out after we left Texarkana, or somebody found out. I don't know who, but I found out from his secretary that he did know, because they sent me to another prison. See, they yanked me out of there when I really gave them a bunch of shit. Told them I was going to tell the story to the papers and everything. I was going to call every paper in the United States and give them the story, what's been going down.
Because you wanted to get out of the prison before you got killed.
Exactly, I did.
So wait, so tell me that again. So you the minute you found out you were in, that he knew, you wanted to get out of the prison.
I told him, look, I had done everything for you, now take me out and put me in the witness program. Oh, no, you don't need to do that, Jack. Hey, he doesn't know. I said, that's bullshit. He knows every fucking thing. And you know it, and I know it.
Do you think they wanted you to get killed?
Huh?
Do you think they kind of wanted you to get killed?
Of course they did. That's why they were going to send me to Atlanta. I would have never come out of there. I would have never come out of there. But since I scared the shit out of them, telling them I was going to write all these newspapers and call them, and I had a phone right in myself, I could have done it. In an hour, they had me out of that prison on the way to California. When I got to California, I called his secretary again. She said, "You dirty low-life motherfucker. He knows that you've been working with the FBI, that you're a goddamn informer." Here I am sitting in another prison. Even though it was a very low level, he could have got me in there. He didn't get me in there, but he could have got me in there. He knew that I was the one that was against him, and I had been working with the FBI all that time.
So let me ask this two different ways. So a long journey for you, Jack, in your life. Deserting your family, robbing a bank, turning yourself in, going to prison, befriending a mobster, Carlos Marcelo, one of the most powerful mobsters in the 60s and the 70s, and
in all the United States.
And ultimately having him tell you, becoming an FBI informant and having him tell you how he set up the assassination of John F. Kennedy, exactly how it was done. Going on the run for 15 years after you get out of prison,
Correct.
Fearing for your life, and finally coming back and reuniting with your family and going public with this story.
Yes.
How does it feel? You're back with your family. You're reunited. You've had a long journey.
I'm happy. You see, I was back with them a long time before, probably a couple of 3 years before they were aware of what happened. What happened is I was contacted by NBC, and they said, we know about your stay in the prison with Marcelo. We want to do a documentary. Do you want to be in it? I talked to them, and I started to back out of it, and I wished I had. I really do, because they didn't tell the complete story, and they wouldn't let me because of time and one thing and another. And so I was in the documentary, and everybody saw it, and nothing happened. Time went by, and 3.5 years ago, I was contacted by George DiCaprio, who was Leonardo's father, and he says, "There's going to be a movie, Jack, and you're going to be the main part of it, and one thing and another," and he explained everything that was going down. So I sold my life rights story to Warner Brothers and was paid a good, substantial amount for it. And it's been going on now for 3 years, and now they're getting ready to start the shooting, probably in a month or two. And we've got a great director, and we've got the greatest actor on the screen today, Leonardo DiCaprio, and we've got the next best playing Marcelo, and it's going to be a great movie, and it's going to tell the story, but not really the way that I could tell it like here. I mean, in more detail. You know, the movies is not going to be able to do everything in detail, but the people of the United States will see the movie, and perhaps they will contact their congressman and contact people and say, "Listen, this guy knows what he's talking about. Let's get these goddamn FBI son of a bitches off their ass and get them fucking tapes out so the people can see the real truth. Not just what he says, but what the FBI knows to be true. And let's forget all this crap that went on over all the years, the lies and the deceit. Let's have the honest to God truth come out."